Hey guys, tonight we slip back into a world of wooden shutters, smoke-filled hearths, and mud-clogged lanes. You're not scrolling through your phone in bed anymore. You're crawling out from under a scratchy wool blanket in the year 1297 in a village called Brigstock in Northamptonshire, England. The rooster doesn't care that you stayed up late grinding barley yesterday. He's screaming at the top of his lungs, and the cows low in answer. It smells of damp straw, smoke, and just a hint of manure. Picturesque, right? Except, if you actually had to live here, you probably wouldn't survive the first winter. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing the mix of places and hours. It's like a medieval roll call. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice, as you rub your eyes and squint into the smoky half-light, is how alive the village feels even before the sun is fully up. Brigstock, where Cecilia Pennefader was born, isn't just a dot on the map. It's a living, breathing patchwork of cottages, fields, and people who all know way too much about each other. The place has around 200 or so souls, which means everyone knows if you burned your porridge yesterday or if your ox pulled someone else's plough. Privacy? Not a thing. Your house is a one-room thatched hut with a smoky hearth at the centre and walls plastered with daub that feels perpetually damp. The floor? Packed earth, sometimes strewn with straw, sometimes with whatever you tracked in. You share this space with your parents, siblings, maybe a grandparent, and if you're unlucky, a chicken that refuses to stay outside. The smell is, let's call it, organic. Still, this is home. You slip on a woolen tunic, scratchy, hand-spun, and probably patched a dozen times. Clothes aren't fast fashion. They're heirlooms that survive until they basically disintegrate. Shoes, if you even have them, are clumsy leather things that get wet the moment you step outside. And outside is always wet. England's weather in the Middle Ages has no chill, literally. Mud sticks to everything. But there's something comforting about the rhythm. You hear your mother stoking the fire, your father muttering about tools, and siblings already squabbling over a wooden bowl. Life starts with chores, because survival doesn't pause for anyone. Even before breakfast, someone's feeding the pig, someone's fetching water from the village well, and someone's running late to herd the geese. Geese aren't pets here, they're watchdogs with wings, and yes, they'll chase you if you mess with them. As you step into the lane, you see Brigstock itself unfold. It's not just random huts scattered in mud, it's an organised community. The manor house of the Lord looms larger than the rest, reminding everyone who's boss. Around it, cottages cluster, then fields stretch in long strips beyond. Villagers share those strips, carefully measured and parcelled, which means your harvest depends not only on your own back-breaking work, but also on whether your neighbour weeds his strip properly. If he doesn't, guess who gets an infestation of weeds too? Now, mainstream history fact check. Brigstock was a typical medieval village, recorded in documents like manorial rolls. These rolls track rents, fines, and disputes, a medieval version of receipts. And Cecilia's life, pieced together from those records, gives us one of the clearest glimpses into what it actually meant to be a peasant woman around the turn of the 14th century. A quirky tidbit? Archaeologists once found that some villagers used moss stuffed into wooden frames as window glass. Imagine squinting through a moss-green filter every day, centuries before Instagram filters were cool. And here's a scholarly debate to mull over while you scratch your imaginary flea bites. Historians still argue whether village life was suffocatingly oppressive or surprisingly cooperative. Was it all about the Lord squeezing every ounce of labour, or was there genuine solidarity in shared ploughing, shared ovens, and shared gossip? The answer probably depends on whether you asked a hungry tenant farmer or the reeve who got to boss everyone around. You walk toward the fields, passing neighbours who greet you with nods or side eyes depending on yesterday's drama. Maybe someone's sheep wandered into someone else's patch, or someone whispered about who skipped church last Sunday. Gossip isn't background noise, it's social currency. In Brigstock, your reputation is almost as valuable as the cow in your shed. And then there's the sensory world that wraps around you. The clanging of the smithy's hammer, the bleating of sheep, the smell of bread baking in the communal oven if you're lucky enough to afford your turn. Smoke curls from the cottages, but not in a quaint storybook way. It stings your eyes, clings to your tunic, and makes everything taste faintly of ash. But don't forget the animals. Chickens, pigs, and cows are everywhere, wandering in and out of lanes. Sanitation isn't exactly medieval England's strong suit. Waste piles up where it falls, and the village pigs help clean up in their own questionable way. You might joke about your street today smelling after a rainstorm, but in Brigstock, it's a constant sensory assault. On the bright side, you'd probably never complain about city traffic again. The heartbeat of this place is repetition. Work, pray, eat, sleep, over and over. Yet within this routine, stories unfold, children grow, fortunes rise and fall, and ordinary people like Cecilia Pennefather leave faint fingerprints on history. She's just a girl in Brigstock right now, but her choice to live an independent, unmarried life will one day set her apart. For now, she's another villager trudging through mud, doing chores, and trying not to get trampled by a cow on the way to the well. And as the morning unfolds, you realize that what feels ordinary here, muddy fields, smoky air, the drone of prayers in Latin you barely understand, was the pulse of life for most people in medieval Europe. Forget castles and knights. This is the ground level where history actually happened. You grow up surrounded by family, though family in Brigstock isn't just the cosy nuclear setup you're picturing. It's sprawling, messy, and layered with obligations. The Pennefaders are not lords, not knights. They're peasants, but peasants with a name that keeps popping up in the manorial rolls. That means they're visible, for better or worse. When you're Cecilia, every step you take is under the eyes of your parents, siblings, uncles, aunts, cousins, and the entire neighbourhood who seem to think they've got partial ownership of your choices. Your parents set the tone. Your father rises early to see to tools and animals, his voice deep and gruff in the smoky dawn. Your mother, busy with spinning, cooking, and corralling children, somehow manages to run the household while whispering warnings like, "Don't you dare get caught daydreaming in church again." Medieval mothers are multitaskers on expert mode. The children you and your siblings fill the cottage with noise. Squabbles break out over bowls of pottage, a thin soup that's basically the breakfast, lunch, and dinner of choice. Someone always tries to snatch the larger ladleful. You shove back, they shove harder, and before you know it, a wooden spoon smacks the table with maternal authority. Ah, sibling rivalry, it truly is timeless. But beneath the bickering lies solidarity. Everyone pitches in to survive. If your older brother is out in the fields, you're fetching water or tending animals. If your sister's weaving, you're trying not to tangle the thread while pretending you're helping. The idea of childhood as a carefree wonderland? Not here. Childhood is more like an internship for adulthood, minus pay, snacks, or weekends off. Still, there are moments of laughter. You and other children race barefoot through muddy lanes, daring each other to climb trees or steal apples from the Lord's orchard, which you definitely should not do. But come on, apples taste better when forbidden. Your world is small, just cottages, fields and hedges, but within that, it feels endless. Now, a mainstream historical fact. Medieval families were units of both labour and identity. They weren't just about love, they were economic engines, ensuring enough hands to work the land. In fact, many manorial court records, where Cecilia's name appears, list not only individuals, but their entire families tied to obligations. If one person fell behind, the family name carried the weight of that debt. A quirky tidbit? Some households shared beds not only with siblings, but with parents, cousins, and sometimes guests. Imagine tucking in at night with 3 siblings kicking you, your grandmother snoring, and the neighbour who dropped by because his roof leaked. Sleepovers weren't optional, they were architectural. And historians still argue whether these close-packed households bred suffocating tension or created resilient bonds. Did people resent the lack of privacy, or did they thrive on constant connection? Probably both, depending on whether you were the kid stuck between the snorer and the bedwetter. Meals anchor the day. Bread, pottage, maybe a scrap of bacon if fortune smiles. You chew slowly, because food isn't guaranteed. Every loaf represents labour. Grain planted, harvested, ground, baked. You don't waste crumbs, even the dogs know better than to beg. If you're lucky, on a festival day, the table might hold cheese, eggs, or ale. And oh, the ale small beer, weak enough for kids, safer than water that might be carrying who knows what. You sip and burp, and no one bats an eye. Evenings are family time in the loosest sense. The hearth glows, shadows dance on the walls, and stories are told. Tales of saints, cautionary fables, and maybe gossip disguised as moral instruction. You lean in, wide-eyed, half scared, half fascinated, trying to ignore the creaks of the thatch above you. Rats live up there, and sometimes they drop down unexpectedly. That's right, your bedtime companion might be a squeaky, whiskered surprise. Sleep tight. But these shared moments stitch your identity. You're not just Cecilia, you're a pennifader, with duties, debts, and a reputation to guard. That reputation can be fragile. A sibling's misstep stealing wood, skipping church, quarrelling too loudly, lands the entire family name in the manorial court. And once your family's on record, it lingers. Historians centuries later will spot it, shaking their heads over how a pennifader failed to control a goat. Yes, even your livestock mistakes echo through time. In this tight circle, affection looks different. Hugs aren't the norm. Work is the language of care. Your mother spinning late into the night means you'll have clothes. Your father, patching tools, ensures there's food tomorrow. Your siblings helping in the fields, even after yelling at you in the morning, prove that loyalty runs beneath the arguments. Love here is pragmatic, but no less real, and it shapes Cecilia. Growing up in a house where duties press from all sides, where every meal depends on collaboration, where your identity is fused with your family's standing, this molds her resilience. Later, when she chooses not to marry, that background of bickering, solidarity, and shared survival will remind her that she can stand alone too. But for now, she's one voice in the noisy pennifader household, one set of muddy feet in the crowd. Outside, the church bell tolls, pulling families toward prayer. You file out together, bundled in cloaks, trudging down lanes slick with mud. The whole village watches each family arrive. In Brigstock, everyone knows who belongs to whom and who's missing from the pews. Faith isn't just religion here. It's another stage where your family reputation performs, and you're part of the act whether you like it or not. The day's rhythm really begins with the grind, literally. Before you even think about eating, you've got to make bread. And in Brigstock, bread isn't a casual side item, it's the backbone of survival. No bread, no energy to keep going. You wake, grab the sack of grain, and start trudging toward the mill. Your arms ache from yesterday, but tough luck hunger doesn't care. You hear the mill long before you see it. That heavy thump of water-driven gears, the endless churn as wooden cogs groan against each other. The village mill is loud, dusty, and smells faintly of damp flour. You stand in line with neighbours, all clutching sacks of barley, rye, or wheat. And no, you don't get to grind it for free. The lord of the manor takes his cut. It's called a mulcher, and it means a chunk of your flour vanishes straight into his bin. You mutter under your breath, but you pay up, because the alternative is starvation. Once home, the grain becomes dough. Your hands sink into the mixture of flour, water, and maybe a pinch of salt if you can afford it. No fancy sourdough starter here. This is bread that just has to get you through the day. You knead until your arms are jelly, then slap it into a rough loaf. Sometimes, families bake at home in the smoky hearth, but often you carry your dough to the communal oven. Imagine a medieval shared kitchen, except your neighbours are watching like hawks to make sure you don't hog the best heat. When the bread finally emerges, steaming and dark-crusted, the smell alone makes you dizzy. You tear a piece, chew slowly, and feel the rough texture scratch your throat. This isn't soft sandwich bread. It's dense, heavy, sometimes full of little bits of grit from the millstones. Congratulations, you've just chipped a tooth. Dental insurance? Not invented yet. Still, bread is life. You dunk it into pottage, a thick stew of beans, peas, and whatever vegetables survived in the garden. Sometimes you throw in bacon fat for flavour, or onions, or, if you're blessed, a slice of cheese. It's not glamorous, but it fills your stomach. And when you're Cecilia, you know that full bellies are precious. Mainstream historical fact here. In medieval England, bread made up as much as 60–70% of a peasant's calories. That's how central it was. Forget three-course meals if you had bread and ale, you had the basics covered. A quirky tidbit? Some peasants used trenchers, flat slabs of stale bread as plates. After eating, you either tossed the trencher to the dogs, or, if you were generous, gave it to the poor. Disposable dinnerware, medieval style. And historians still argue whether peasants lived in a state of near-constant malnutrition, or whether they managed surprisingly balanced diets through gardens, gleaning, and seasonal variety. Some evidence points to bones showing signs of deficiencies, but other studies suggest villagers actually ate more vegetables and less red meat than the rich folk, making their diet accidentally healthier. Depends whether you count occasional onion as healthy, I guess. Beyond the bread, chores keep rolling. You spend hours helping thresh grain, beating the stalks to separate kernels. Dust clings to your skin, your arms ache, and the rhythm thuds on like an endless drum. Or you're in the dairy, skimming cream, churning butter, your hands red from cold. Children often helped with these jobs, which meant Cecilia's small hands were probably calloused before she even hit her teens. Childhood in Brigstock is less about toys and more about tools. There's humour though. Someone spills flour and sneezes, coating themselves like a ghost. Another neighbour tries to sneak a bigger loaf from the communal oven and gets caught. Cue village-wide laughter. These little accidents lighten the grind, making back-breaking work feel bearable. By midday, bread sits heavy in your belly, energy enough to drag you to the next task. Maybe you're patching clothes with clumsy stitches, or scaring crows away from fields by waving rags tied to sticks. Medieval scarecrows weren't just straw men, They were actual kids yelling and clapping, unpaid interns of the harvest season. And yes, sometimes the Lord's steward checks up on you. He might demand extra work days, remind you of your dues, or fine you for using his woodland to gather firewood. Every twig technically belongs to him. You think about hiding sticks under your cloak, but the fine for theft isn't worth it. Still, people do it anyway. Firewood is life, and risk is part of survival. Evenings bring the return of bread, another slice, another dunk in pottage, maybe washed down with weak ale. You chew, laugh with family, and try to forget your aching arms. Smoke fills the cottage as the hearth glows, shadows stretching across damp walls. Your body feels worn, but this is normal, this is life. What's extraordinary is how much skill you gain just by growing up. You, Cecilia, know how to knead bread by instinct, how to judge whether dough will rise by touch alone. You can milk a cow, gather eggs, mend a cloak, all before you're 15. Your modern self might struggle to cook without a microwave, but medieval you is a survival machine. And as you lie down that night, belly full of coarse bread and dreams heavy as the smoke above, you're not thinking about history books or future scholars. You're just hoping tomorrow's dough rises, the flour stretches a bit further, and maybe, just maybe, there'll be enough for everyone to eat without arguing over the last crust. The real heartbeat of Brigstock isn't inside the smoky cottages, it's out in the open fields. You rise before the mist has lifted and trudge out, wooden tools slung across your shoulder, ready to join the long line of villagers moving toward the strips of farmland. From a distance, the whole setup looks like someone took a giant comb and dragged it across the earth. Narrow, uneven strips running side by side, each belonging to different households, crisscrossed by ridges and furrows that catch the light of dawn. You don't get one big square of land, you get scattered strips. The system is called open field agriculture, and it means your plot is wedged between your neighbours and your neighbours' neighbours, and so on. If their ox stumbles, your furrow gets crooked. If they don't weed, your strip pays the price. Farming here is teamwork, except with way more passive-aggressive side eyes. You pick up the heavy wooden plough handles. The ox trudges forward, and the soil turns reluctantly. It's clumpy, full of stones, and stubborn as ever. Every step feels like a wrestling match with nature. The air is damp, your boots sink in mud, and your arms burn, but you press on, because in Brigstock, if the land fails, you fail. A mainstream historical fact, England's medieval agriculture revolved around the three-field system. One field was sown with wheat or rye, another with oats or barley, and the third left fallow to rest. Rotation kept the soil from exhausting completely. Without it, harvests collapsed. So your life is literally measured in rotations and furrows. A quirky tidbit? Peasants sometimes sang bawdy songs while ploughing, partly to keep rhythm, partly to annoy the reeve. Imagine TikTok sea shanties, but muddier and less workplace friendly. And historians still argue whether medieval farming was an unchanging stagnant grind, or whether peasants were quietly innovating, trying new crops and methods beneath the radar of the lords. Were they stuck in tradition, or were they experimental gardeners of survival? The jury's still out. The rhythm of the fields is relentless. Sowing in spring, weeding in summer, harvesting in autumn, ploughing again before frost. There's no off-season, just different kinds of exhaustion. During harvest, everyone joins in. Men swing sickles, women gather sheaves, children scuttle behind, picking up stray stalks. It's sweaty, communal, and sometimes joyful, especially when someone cracks a joke about the reeve's bald spot. But it's also high stakes. A bad harvest means lean winter, and lean winter means empty bellies, debts, and prayers whispered into the smoky rafters of the church. Lunch is usually bread and onions, maybe a wedge of cheese. You sit in the furrow, back aching, watching crows circle overhead. You clap your hands to scare them, but deep down, you envy their freedom. At least they can fly away. You? you're tied to this soil. Then comes threshing, the brutal job of beating grain heads to shake loose the kernels. It's noisy, dusty, and tiring, but oddly satisfying when you hear the rattle of freed grain. Your skin itches from the straw, your throat rasps with dust, and you keep swinging, because every kernel is tomorrow's loaf, tomorrow's survival. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, you notice the little beauties, a hare darting across the furrows, wildflowers sprouting along a ridge, the golden glow of ripening wheat against a stormy sky. Brigstock isn't pretty in a fairy tale way, but it has its moments of rough poetry. And of course, the gossip continues even here. Someone whispers about whose cow wandered, someone mutters about unpaid tithes, someone laughs at a drunken stumble in the furrow. Work is never just work, it's a stage for village drama. Evenings return you to the cottage, but the fields stay in your body. Your back aches, your palms blister, and soil lingers under your nails, no matter how much you scrub. You dream of furrows, of endless rows, of harvests that never quite meet demand. And yet, when you wake, you pull on your tunic and do it again, because in Brigstock, the fields don't wait. They demand, they consume, they define. And Cecilia Pennefather, daughter of these fields, learns early that survival means bending your back to the rhythm of soil and season. The good days taste of roasted meat and laughter. The bad days taste of watered-down gruel and quiet dread. That's the pendulum you swing between in Brigstock, because life here is always balancing on a knife edge between feast and famine. One season of good weather, and you're dancing at harvest festivals. One season of rain and blight, and you're staring at your dwindling bread, trying to trick your stomach into thinking you're full. You know a feast day has arrived when the church bells sound different, almost playful. The whole village spills into the green, skirts swishing, boots stomping, kids darting like sparrows. On saints' days, no one works. The fields, technically it's about honouring God, but honestly, it's about the joy of a break. Tables appear, ale flows, music erupts from fiddles and drums. Someone's roasting a pig, the fat dripping and hissing into the fire. You grab a chunk of bread, tear off a piece of meat, and for once, you don't have to ration bites. For Cecilia, these days are vivid. The air smells of roasting and spilled ale, the chatter buzzes, and you feel almost wealthy. Children chase hoops, women dance in circles, men arm wrestle and boast. It's chaotic, earthy fun. And yes, sometimes someone drinks too much and has to be hauled home head lolling, while the rest laugh and shake their heads. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval villagers celebrated dozens of feast days tied to the church calendar. Christmas, Easter, saints' days, holy days. They could make up a full third of the year. Not every feast meant a pig roast, but it did mean rest from fieldwork and often some communal food or ale. A quirky tidbit? People in some villages played rough games resembling early football, where an inflated pig bladder got kicked, thrown, and chased across fields. Rules were, don't die, which, surprisingly, many didn't follow. Picture you, knee-deep in mud, chasing a squealing ball while your neighbours tackle you. And historians still argue whether feast days were moments of genuine relief for peasants or subtle pressure valves designed by the church and Lord to keep villagers content with their lot. Were they truly celebrations, or carefully rationed doses of fun? Nobody's quite sure, but if you've just stuffed yourself with roast pork, you don't care much in the moment. But then comes the flip side, famine years. The weather turns foul, rain drowns fields, or frost kills crops. Suddenly, the grain bins look dangerously bare. Bread loaves shrink, pottage gets thinner, and the communal oven feels like a place of quiet despair. You chew a slice of bread that's half rye, half barley, and maybe half dust, and still it doesn't fill you. Your belly growls, children cry at night, and neighbours trade desperate glances at the well. You might gather wild greens, boil nettles, or even stretch flour with ground up beans or acorns, whatever can bulk out the dough. Hunger makes you creative, but also short-tempered. A quarrel breaks out over who took too many turnips. Someone accuses someone else of hoarding, and the reeve shows up to enforce fines just when you can least afford them. Children suffer most in these years. Thin faces, quiet whimpers, fevers that steal away the weak. You go to bed gnawing hunger, wake up with the same emptiness, and pray in church that next season will turn kinder. And yet, famine shapes memory as much as feast. It reminds you to savour abundance when it comes, to hoard joy as carefully as grain. Even in lean times, though, humour sneaks in. Someone jokes that the ale is so watered down it could put out a fire. Another mutters that the Lord's pig looks fatter than any child in Brigstock. Sarcasm keeps spirits alive when bread can't. And through all of this, Cecilia grows up with a sense that life isn't steady. It lurches between extremes. One day, she's dancing with a garland of flowers. Another, she's watching her neighbours quietly bury a child. These memories lodge deep. They teach her resilience, thrift, and a kind of stubborn joy in survival. Because if you can laugh while chewing acorn bread, you can laugh through anything. The rhythm of Brigstock doesn't just belong to the plough or the oven, it belongs to the bell tower. When those bells toll, you stop what you're doing. You trudge into the cold nave of Brigstock Church, and suddenly the smoky chatter of cottages gives way to the echo of Latin chants you don't really understand. Religion isn't optional here. It's stitched into every breath you take. The church itself looms over the village like a stern parent. Stone walls, high windows, a faint smell of incense mixed with damp stone. You shuffle in, dip your fingers in the holy water stoop, and cross yourself. The priest drones in Latin, and you kneel on the hard floor, trying not to fidget. Your knees ache, your stomach rumbles, but the rhythm of the prayers is oddly soothing. It's like being wrapped in a chant, even if the words fly right over your head. Mainstream historical fact. Almost every medieval village had a parish church, and attendance was expected. Baptism, marriage, confession, burial, all of life's milestones passed under that stone roof. Even the poorest peasant paid tithes, usually 1/10 of their produce, to support the church. A quirky tidbit? Some villagers believed holy water had medicinal properties. People secretly took a sip or dabbed it on wounds, like a medieval all-purpose ointment. Who needs a pharmacy when you've got sanctified water and faith? And historians still argue whether religion was deeply heartfelt devotion, or more like a social obligation. Did peasants truly tremble before God, or did they just go through the motions to avoid suspicion and gossip? In Cecilia's Brigstock, it's probably a mix. Some whispering prayers with raw desperation, others daydreaming about cheese while pretending to listen. Beyond Sunday Mass, faith weaves into everyday rituals. You say a blessing before bread, you mutter charms against sickness, you cross yourself when thunder cracks. The calendar itself bends around the church feast days, fast days, saints' days, marking the passage of time as much as seasons do. Fasts can feel cruel. During Lent, meat disappears from your diet, replaced with fish if you can get it. Some villagers cheat, of course. You've probably snuck bacon into a pot and hoped the priest didn't notice the smell drifting out the chimney. God knows all, but maybe he's too busy to catch you this time. Church isn't just about faith. It's a stage for reputation. Everyone sees who shows up late, who whispers too much, who looks suspiciously smug. Gossip thrives in the pews as much as in the fields. You learn quickly that piety is as much about being seen as about being sincere. The priest, meanwhile, isn't just your spiritual leader, he's also your news anchor. From the pulpit, you hear about royal decrees, local disputes, even the latest trouble brewing in distant lands. For many, this is the only headline service they'll ever know, and since parchment is pricey and literacy rare, you trust his voice, whether he's preaching salvation or announcing a new tax. Still, there's comfort in ritual. The flicker of candles, the scent of incense, the rhythm of voices rising together, it's a break from mud and toil. For Cecilia, these moments of shared worship anchor life. even when hunger gnaws or quarrels simmer outside. Even funerals carry strange solace. The tolling bell, the murmured prayers, the promise that the soul moves on to a better place. You stand in the graveyard, the earth damp beneath your shoes, the scent of freshly turned soil mixing with incense. Death is close in Brigstock, but so is the reassurance that heaven offers something gentler. Of course, not every ritual feels lofty. Sometimes you're just trying not to sneeze when the incense cloud hits you in the face. Sometimes you can't stop giggling when a candle sputters out at the wrong moment. And sometimes you glance at your neighbour's shoes and think, wow, those are falling apart faster than mine. Piety and pettiness coexist nicely in a medieval pew. Faith also shows up in unexpected places. Amulets tucked under clothes, whispered charms, pilgrimages dreamed about but rarely achieved. Maybe you've scratched a cross into your doorway to keep away evil, or hung a sprig of herbs because your grandmother swore it worked. Official religion blends with older folk practices, forming a spiritual patchwork. For Cecilia, growing up in this blend of awe, routine, and superstition means faith is less about abstract theology and more about lived habit. God is in bread, bells, blessings, and the shadow of the church spire stretching across the fields. You might question fairness. Why does the Lord feast while children starve? But you rarely question God's presence. As the bell tolls again and you file out of the stone doorway, squinting at the daylight, the ordinary world resumes. Mud clings to your boots, chores wait at home, but for a little while you felt part of something bigger, a rhythm that connected Brigstock's 200 souls to a divine story stretching far beyond. If you're Cecilia in Brigstock, you notice pretty early that the world of women looks different from the world of men. Your father trudges to the fields with a plough, but you and your sisters, you're in charge of just about everything else. Spinning, weaving, cooking, brewing ale, tending children, mending clothes, basically all the behind-the-scenes survival hacks that keep a household upright. You don't get to choose whether to help, you just grow into it, like slipping into a tunic that's been waiting for you. By the time you're 10, your hands already know the feel of wool being twisted into yarn, the ache of carrying buckets from the well, the sting of smoke in your eyes as you lean over the hearth. Womanhood isn't an age, it's a job description. And while men get recognised for their fields and oxen, women's work is so constant it almost goes invisible. Almost because without it, the whole place collapses. Mainstream historical fact, medieval women's work extended far beyond the home. They brewed ale to sell. They sold eggs or spun wool at market. They joined in at harvest. They nursed the sick. Their labour wasn't secondary, it was essential to the village economy. The manorial roles even record women fined for brewing with bad grain or selling ale without permission. A quirky tidbit? Ale, the staple drink, was often brewed by women called alewives. They'd hang a broomstick over their door to signal a fresh batch was ready. Yes, the classic witch on a broom image has roots in ale brewing advertisements. Imagine you stirring a cauldron, except it's full of warm, slightly sour beer. And historians still argue whether women like Cecilia had more independence than we assume, or whether patriarchy pressed down so hard that even small freedoms were illusions. Was brewing ale an act of economic agency, or just another duty piled on? Did single women like Cecilia resist expectations, or were they tolerated because villages needed every pair of hands? The debate lingers, with no single answer. For young women, the big looming question is marriage. Most villagers expect it. Partnership means more labour, more security, and more children to work the fields. But marriage also means surrendering property and legal identity into your husband's control. You trade family authority for your husband's authority, and your voice gets quieter in manorial courts. Unless, like Cecilia later chooses, you never marry at all. In Brigstock, unmarried women are rare, but not unheard of. People whisper about them, some admire their independence, others mutter about stubbornness or misfortune. You feel the eyes on you as you grow older, wondering what path you'll take. For now, though, you're still in the swirl of chores, festivals, gossip, and survival. But daily life isn't only burdensome. There's camaraderie in shared work. You and the other girls spin wool together, singing songs to pass the time, joking about whose fleece is lumpiest. At harvest, women bend side by side, chatting even as your backs ache. There's laughter at the well, where gossip flows as freely as water. Who's courting whom? Whose ox broke free? Who got caught dozing in church? The Well is Brigstock's unofficial news network, powered by women's voices. Marriage customs shape the rhythm, too. Villagers watch couples pair off, dowries negotiated, banns announced in church. Weddings become whole village affairs. Music, ale, dancing until the ground turns to mud. You watch with curiosity, maybe with nerves, as your peers step into married life. The unspoken pressure grows heavier with each year, but you also notice quiet resistance. A woman speaks sharply to her husband in the lane. Another negotiates fiercely over her butter price at market. A widow manages her land with no man in sight. Authority isn't all one-sided. Women carve out space where they can, balancing obedience with stubborn practicality. Even children notice. You, Cecilia, watch your mother stretch food for a hungry household, or your neighbour brew ale that keeps the village cheerful, and you realise power isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet persistence that ensures survival. Still, there are constraints. The church preaches about women's obedience, neighbours joke about shrews who need taming. Gossip cuts sharp, especially if you step outside expected roles. Your reputation is fragile. One rumour of promiscuity or laziness, and you're branded for years. The village remembers. Yet in those whispered, smoky corners of Brigstock, you feel the stirrings of choice. You're growing into a world that expects you to marry, to yield, to fit neatly into a husband's life. But you've also seen women stand alone, manage land, shape households without men. And that seed of independence will matter later. For now, you laugh at the well, stretch wool between your fingers, and wonder if maybe you could be more than what's expected. You can't grow up in Brigstock without learning how the manor court hangs over everything like a watchful hawk. It's not a grand courtroom with wigs and gavels. It's a wooden table set up in the Lord's Hall, or sometimes in the open air, where peasants shuffle forward, hats in hand, to settle disputes and hear judgments. For Cecilia and her neighbours, this court isn't optional. It's the backbone of order, property, and punishment. Picture it. You're standing in the crowd, mud drying on your boots, waiting to hear who's been fined for letting their pig run loose, who owes rent, or who insulted whom at the well. The steward calls names, clerks scratch notes into parchment, and the villagers shift nervously, knowing any of them could be next. Mainstream historical fact. Manor courts handled everything from enforcing labour obligations to petty disputes. They kept track of rents, fines, inheritances, and village offences. For most peasants, this was the only legal system they ever encountered. Kings and Parliament felt distant. The manor court was the law. A quirky tidbit? Courts sometimes fined villagers for absurd-sounding infractions, like brewing weak ale, blocking a path with manure, or even allowing geese to honk too loudly during services. Imagine being recorded in history as that one guy who couldn't control his goose. And historians still argue whether manor courts were harsh tools of lordly control or surprisingly flexible systems where villagers could voice grievances and shape outcomes. Were peasants merely crushed beneath the lord's authority, or did they find ways to bend the court to their advantage? The debate continues, as it often does when records capture fines, but not the smirks and eye rolls behind them. When you, Cecilia, get called forward, your heart pounds. Maybe your family owes a small fee for grazing animals on common land too early. Maybe you're a witness in a quarrel over a broken fence. The reeve, the lord's local enforcer, leans forward, eager to collect the fine that fattens the manor's coffers. You mumble your answer, shuffle back, and feel the villager's eyes linger. Reputation here isn't just about gossip. It's inscribed into legal memory. The whole process has a theatre-like quality. The lord, or his steward, sits in judgment. Villagers murmur and snicker. Punishments get handed down. A neighbour gets fined for stealing wood, another for skipping work duty on the lord's land, another for a drunken scuffle at the alehouse. Everyone laughs when the steward describes the scuffle in exaggerated detail, but no one laughs when the fine is read out. Money hurts. Yet the court isn't only about punishment. It's also where inheritances are confirmed, disputes over land boundaries resolved, marriages recognised. Life transitions pass through this wooden table, with clerks recording details in neat Latin. That's how we know Cecilia existed at all, her name written in ink that outlived her body, frozen in a record of fines and obligations. She never knew historians centuries later would peer at those lines, building her life story from what seemed mundane at the time. Standing in that crowd, you feel the mix of dread and fascination. The court is authority embodied, but it's also entertainment. Villagers gossip afterward, replaying cases, mocking those who tripped over words, whispering about who seemed too cosy with the reeve. And sometimes the system bends. A widow pleads for leniency, and the steward reduces her fine. A respected villager challenges a neighbour, and witnesses back him up until the court sides his way. Even in this rigid system, there are cracks where community pressure leaks through. Still, you never forget the imbalance. The Lord profits from every judgment. The clerk's quill scratches out your mistakes for eternity, and you walk home lighter in purse, but heavier in memory. The mud clings to your boots, the villager's eyes weigh on your shoulders, and you tell yourself, next time, keep the geese quiet. For Cecilia, these experiences plant lessons about authority and independence. She learns early that the law is not neutral, it bends to power and coin, but she also sees how villagers maneuver, joke, plead, and push back. She absorbs the knowledge that survival in Brigstock isn't just about bread and fields. It's about knowing when to nod, when to pay, and when to quietly resist. By the time the bell rings to dismiss the crowd, the court has already reshaped village life again. Fines ripple through households, gossip ripples through lanes, and Brigstock trudges on, bound by rules written in ink and enforced by weary peasants pretending the system makes sense. If the manor court is where rules get written, then the lanes and hedgerows of Brigstock are where those rules get tested. Neighbours make your life rich, messy, and occasionally unbearable. You can't take a step without bumping into someone who knows your family history, your last fine, and probably what you had for supper. Community is both safety net and minefield. You, Cecilia, grow up watching this intricate dance of cooperation and conflict. One moment, you're helping your neighbour gather firewood. The next, you're glaring at them because their sheep strayed into your garden. Quarrels spark fast here. Did someone borrow a tool and not return it? Did someone take too much from the common pasture? Did someone insult someone else at the alehouse after a few too many mugs? Welcome to the medieval soap opera. Mainstream historical fact. Village disputes often ended up in the manor court, but most were handled informally through gossip, reputation, or neighbours pressuring each other. Social ties bound everyone so tightly that no one could afford to be permanently at war. You needed your neighbour to watch your animals, lend a tool, or help at harvest. A quirky tidbit? Some disputes were settled through love days, informal gatherings, where villagers met, argued, and then shared ale to seal reconciliation. Imagine mandatory group therapy with weak beer. And historians still argue whether medieval villages were harmonious little collectives or hotbeds of simmering hostility. Were peasants united by shared struggle or constantly undercutting each other for scraps of advantage? Brigstock likely swung between both, depending on the season, the weather, and the gossip mill. Speaking of gossip, the well is ground zero. You can't haul water without hearing who's pregnant, who owes rent, or whose ox trampled whose cabbages. Gossip isn't frivolous chatter. It's the village's social glue and court of opinion. Ignore it at your peril. If you're marked lazy, untrustworthy, or immoral, you'll pay in lost help and endless side eyes. You remember the sting of your own family's feuds. Maybe a Penefader cow wandered into a neighbour's strip, chewing grain it shouldn't. Suddenly there's shouting across furrows, fists waved, insults flying. Tomorrow, though, you're side by side at harvest, silently working off the tension. Forgiveness isn't about generosity, it's about survival. And then there are the moments of joy. Festivals bring reconciliation, neighbours drinking and dancing together until quarrels blur. Weddings are occasions where grudges soften, at least for the day. Even funerals knit the community in shared grief. You see how people fight, but also how they can't escape each other's orbit. There's humour too. Someone's goose escapes and charges through the village green, scattering children and adults alike. Laughter rings out, even from the owner chasing behind. Or someone topples headfirst into the communal ditch during ditch cleaning duty, and for weeks afterward, jokes fly every time they pass. For Cecilia, growing up in this web of connection teaches caution and resilience. You learn to read moods, to anticipate when a neighbour's muttering is about to spark a quarrel, to know when to speak and when silence is safer. It's social survival, just as real as farming or bread making. But you also notice how reputation can be a form of power. A neighbour with a good name can get away with more. A woman who's respected at the well can nudge others to her side in disputes. And someone with a tarnished reputation, they struggle to get even small favours. The court may hold the Lord's authority, but gossip holds the people's. As dusk falls, you walk home past cottages glowing with firelight, neighbours' laughter and shouts drifting through thin walls. You realise you're part of a community that will never let you disappear into anonymity. That can be comforting on lonely nights, but suffocating when you just want a little peace. Still, you know this constant push and pull, this cycle of quarrels and reconciliations, is what binds Brigstock. And you, Cecilia Penefader, are learning the delicate art of living with neighbours you can neither escape nor fully trust. Just when you think Brigstock is predictable fields, bread, gossip, the shadow of sickness sweeps in and reminds you how fragile it all is. Illness doesn't politely knock, it barges through doors, lays people flat, and rearranges families overnight. Sometimes it's a fever that burns through children. Sometimes it's a cough that lingers until it steals a life. And sometimes, though not yet the Black Death, waves of plague-like sickness roll through, leaving fresh graves in the churchyard. You wake to the sound of coughing, harsh and ragged, echoing through your one-room cottage. Your mother mutters prayers under her breath. Your father looks grim, and you realise today's chores are heavier because half the family can't rise from the straw mats. Illness doesn't just hurt bodies, it wrecks the balance of labour. A sick father means unploughed furrows. A sick mother means untended hearths. A sick child means heartbreak. Mainstream historical fact. Epidemics swept through medieval England in waves long before the famous Black Death of 1347. Dysentery, typhoid, ergot poisoning from mouldy grain villages like Brigstock were vulnerable to all of it. Records show mortality spikes in certain years that devastated communities even without the plague. A quirky tidbit? One folk remedy for fevers involved tying a live chicken to the patient's stomach to draw out the illness. Picture lying there sweaty and weak while a bewildered chicken flaps against your ribs. Medicine wasn't always confidence-inspiring, and historians still argue whether peasants accepted illness as God's will, or whether they actively sought cures through herbs, charms, and prayers. Did faith dominate their response, or was there a quiet, practical science in women's kitchens and village herb gardens? Evidence points to both. You, Cecilia, grow up watching these rhythms of sickness and survival. When someone falls ill, neighbours sometimes step in, bringing broth or tending children. But fear also creeps in, fear of contagion, fear of death, fear of what empty fields will mean for everyone. You learn early that compassion wrestles with self-preservation. The village healer, usually an older woman with a sharp eye and sharper tongue, brews concoctions from herbs. Chamomile for stomach aches, willow bark for pain, garlic for infections. Some remedies help, some do nothing, some make you gag so badly you'd rather take your chances with the fever. Still, her presence is a comfort. Even when she mutters spells under her breath, you cling to the hope that words and plants together can coax life back into a fragile body. Death feels close here, not a distant abstraction. You walk past the churchyard daily, graves fresh and old, mixing under the same crooked crosses. Children know the words of the burial service almost as well as they know the words of the Lord's Prayer. And when the bell tolls, you shiver, knowing another neighbour's name will be spoken in hushed tones that night. Yet even in the shadow of illness, life clings stubbornly. Laughter sneaks back into cottages when fevers break. Survivors limp into the sun, thinner but alive. Children chase each other around the green again, as though sickness never touched them. Humans have a way of bouncing back, even in the muddiest, harshest corners of history. For Cecilia, every wave of illness reinforces a truth. Tomorrow isn't promised. You learn to savour feast days more, to laugh harder at the alehouse, to hold on to stubborn independence. If death can come suddenly, why not live with a little more choice while you can? That seed, small now, will grow into the boldness that defines her adulthood. Even tonight, as you lie down in the smoky cottage, you hear a neighbour coughing through the thin walls, and your mind drifts uneasily. You cross yourself, whisper a prayer, and hope that tomorrow you'll still wake to the rooster's crow instead of the tolling of the church bell. Money in Brigstock isn't the shiny clink of coins in a purse. It's obligation, tally, and sometimes debt breathing down your neck. You, Cecilia, grow up in a world where wealth isn't measured in gold, but in how many strips of land your family holds, how many animals graze your pasture, and whether you can pay the rents, fines, and tithes demanded year after year. The rhythm of obligation is relentless. At Martinmas, you owe rent to the Lord, paid in grain, eggs, or labour. At Easter, the church demands tithes 1/10 of what you produce, carved off your table and into the priest's basket. And when the reeve calls, you owe days of labour on the Lord's demens fields, ploughing his strips instead of your own. Skip it, and you face a fine. Pay the fine late, and the amount doubles. The system has a way of squeezing until your ribs ache. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval peasants lived under a web of dues, money, rents, labour services, heriots, death duties, and church tithes. Even free peasants, without formal serfdom, carried heavy financial burdens. Manorial rolls meticulously record these payments, making them one of the clearest windows into peasant life. A quirky tidbit? Some villages used tally sticks for debts. A notched piece of wood split in half. One half stayed with the creditor, the other with the debtor. When rejoined, the notches proved what was owed. Medieval accounting, part math, part carpentry. And historians still argue whether peasants were constantly crushed by these obligations, or whether they carved out modest prosperity through side hustles, selling ale, trading wool, or saving coins for emergencies. Were they always on the brink, or did they manage more wiggle room than the records suggest? The truth likely shifted with each harvest. You feel money's weight every time a steward visits your door. He recites dues with the calm precision of someone who doesn't care how much grain your children need. You hand over eggs or coins, forcing a smile while muttering curses under your breath. Everyone does it. Complaining won't erase the tally. Yet money flows in odd ways too. Villagers buy and sell small goods at market eggs, cheese, spun wool. Alewives earn coins with every mug. Children fetch pennies for errands. Even labourers sometimes receive cash wages during harvest when lords need every hand. The economy hums beneath the mud, coins clinking as quietly as secrets. And then there are fines. The manor court loves them. Miss a duty, pay a fine. Let your pig wander, pay a fine. Argue too loudly, pay a fine. You can almost hear the clerk's quill scratching with glee as another name gets entered, another coin owed. Money isn't just survival, it's punishment too. Still, cleverness helps. Families stash coins in hiding places, trade goods under the table, or barter favours when cash runs short. You might lend your neighbour a loaf of bread, and in return, she promises to spin wool for you. The system may be rigid, but people are endlessly creative in stretching it. For Cecilia, money becomes both a burden and a tool. She watches her family juggle dues and still manage to hold their strips of land. Later, she will use that same sharpness to remain unmarried, managing her property as her own. For now, she learns how coins slip through fingers faster than water from the well, and how every villager's smile hides quiet calculation. As evening falls, you sit by the fire, tallying in your head. How much grain left? How much rent owed? You nibble bread, sip ale, and sigh, knowing tomorrow brings another reckoning. In Brigstock, money never sleeps. It watches, waits, and demands. Most girls in Brigstock walk the well-trodden path. They marry young, hand their dowries to husbands, and slip into roles defined by hearth and childbearing. But not you, Cecilia. Your life swerves off that expected road and onto something far less common till you remain unmarried, carving out an independent existence in a world that doesn't quite know what to make of it. From the start, the pressure is there, the whispers at the well, the sidelong glances at feast days, the probing questions from neighbours. When will she marry? Who will she wed? You smile, nod, and deflect, but you hold your ground. Maybe you never found the right match. Maybe you didn't want to give up the modest property you inherited. Maybe you valued freedom more than companionship bound by law. Historians still argue about motives like yours, whether unmarried women were rebels, victims, or simply pragmatic. But what's clear is this: you stood apart. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval England, lifelong single women were rare but not unknown. They were often called femme sole, legally able to hold property, make contracts, and appear in court without a husband. This independence came at a cost: social suspicion, vulnerability, and constant pressure, but it was still real power in a society tilted toward men. A quirky tidbit: some unmarried women in records were accused of keeping cats too close, hinting at witchcraft suspicions centuries before the witch craze really peaked. Having a fluffy companion could be rebranded as sinister if you didn't fit expectations. Imagine just trying to cuddle Mr. Whiskers and ending up in the gossip mill. And of course, historians still argue whether Cecilia's unmarried status was a conscious choice of defiance or simply circumstance. Perhaps she was too busy holding land, perhaps no suitor matched her standards, perhaps she preferred independence. The truth is lost in parchment silence, leaving us to wonder. But for you in Brigstock, this path means juggling respect and suspicion. On one hand, you're admired for managing your own affairs. You appear in manorial roles under your own name, paying dues, settling disputes, asserting property rights. That's rare power for a woman. On the other hand, whispers circle. People wonder if you're too stubborn, too strange, too unwilling to bend to custom. Independence always comes with side-eye, in a world where conformity is survival. Daily life is the same: grind bread to bake, strips to tend, dues to pay. But it feels different when you're doing it for yourself. You don't wait for a husband's approval, you decide. Which animals to keep, which debts to settle first, which quarrels to pursue in court, all stamped with your name. That kind of autonomy is intoxicating, even if it comes with loneliness. Of course, loneliness is real. Feast days can sting when couples dance, and you sit aside with the other unmarried women, trading jokes to hide the ache, Nights in your cottage are quieter, the fire snapping loud in the silence. No partner to share burdens, no children to fetch water or gather eggs. Independence buys freedom, but it also demands resilience. Still, Brigstock needs you. Your labour matters, your contributions count, your reputation, sharp-edged though it may be, earns grudging respect. Neighbours might whisper, but they also trade with you, call on you during harvest, nod when you stride into court without flinching. You carve a place for yourself, proving that survival doesn't always require a ring on your finger. Cecilia's life becomes a reminder that even in a world thick with expectations, cracks existed where women could plant themselves and grow differently. Not loudly, not rebelliously, but steadily, with persistence that bends rules by simply ignoring them. As you sit by the fire, staring at the embers, you feel both the weight and the lightness of your path. You chose or accepted a life outside the usual script, and in doing so, you became more visible to history than most of your married neighbours. Not because you shouted, but because you lived, worked, and endured in your own name. Even tucked away in Brigstock, far from castles and battlefields, you can't escape the long reach of war. You hear it first as rumour travellers at market, muttering about skirmishes on the northern border, or about the king calling for another campaign across the channel. The news filters slowly, shaped by exaggeration, but the consequences arrive swiftly in your own life. Taxes, conscription, fear. One morning, the priest announces from the pulpit that the king requires aid. Not soldiers from Brigstock, your peasants, not knights but coin, grain and goods. A royal levy cuts into your stores, shrinking your bread loaves before winter even begins. The manor reeve visits each cottage, tally stick in hand, demanding payments. You grumble, but you hand over what you must. War might be far away, but its hunger reaches into your kitchen. Mainstream historical fact. During the late 13th and early 14th centuries, kings like Edward I demanded frequent taxes to fund campaigns in Scotland, Wales and France. Even distant villages bore the strain, their peasants financing battles they'd never see. A quirky tidbit? Sometimes, instead of coin, villages had to send supplies like arrows. Imagine Brigstock's blacksmith groaning when ordered to churn out bundles of arrows for a war no villager would ever fight. Somewhere, your handiwork might pierce an armoured knight, though you never see the field yourself. And historians still argue whether peasants passively bore these costs, or whether subtle acts of resistance, underpaying, delaying, hiding goods, helped them push back against royal demands. Did they quietly sabotage the system, or did fear of punishment keep them compliant? The debate lingers in the margins of tax records. You also hear whispers of men called away to serve as archers, lured by wages or pressed by obligation. Brigstock loses a few young men for months at a time, leaving their families to manage fields alone. Some return, hardened and silent. Some don't return at all. For those left behind, the war's shadow feels heavier than any news of distant victories. Children pick up fragments of war talk and turn them into games, pretending sticks are swords, shouting about slaying Scots or Frenchmen they've never seen. Adults chuckle, but unease flickers in their eyes. Play doesn't erase the strain. At market, prices rise. Grain grows scarcer. Wool fetches higher prices as demand swells for military supplies. You curse quietly as coins slip away faster than usual. And in Brigstock's alehouse, men grumble louder, ale fueling rants about kings who never tread muddy furrows yet demand endless tribute. Someone jokes that the king should come plough a strip before asking for more taxes, and laughter bursts through the smoke, but the joke is edged with bitterness. For Cecilia, these years impress another truth. Power is distant, yet inescapable. A king she'll never meet has the power to shrink her bread, to empty her purse, to alter her neighbours' lives. Independence in Brigstock is always limited by forces rolling far beyond the hedgerows. Even so, life continues. You still bake bread, weed strips, haul water, The rhythms don't pause for war. But in the quiet moments when you hear bells toll for another levy, when you glance at the empty seat of a neighbour gone to fight, you feel the weight of a world larger than Brigstock pressing down. And at night, when you stretch out on your straw bed, you wonder whether the men in castles and crowns ever think of you at all, or whether Brigstock's sweat and coin vanish into their ledgers without a second thought. The seasons roll on, and you, Cecilia, find yourself no longer the barefoot child scampering after geese, but a woman carrying years on her shoulders. Brigstock has etched itself into your bones: mud, smoke, gossip, laughter, hunger, and harvest. You've lived through feasts and famines, through sickness waves and the endless demands of lord and priest. And now, as lines creep across your face, you begin to notice the way others look at you, with a mix of curiosity, respect, and sometimes a little suspicion. You've never married, and that choice or circumstance marks you out. Younger women whisper about you at the well. Children watch you with wide eyes, as if you're both ordinary and slightly uncanny, a woman who didn't follow the script. Your independence makes you stand taller, but it also makes you an object of stories. Cecilia Pennefader, the woman who manages her own land. Some admire it, others twist it into warnings. Mainstream historical fact: aging peasants often passed their land or goods to children, but unmarried individuals had more freedom in deciding their heirs. They might pass property to siblings, nieces, nephews, or even neighbours who had shown loyalty. These transfers show up clearly in manorial records, preserving the names of those who stood slightly outside the norm. A quirky tidbit: some medieval villagers believed that older, unmarried women carried secret knowledge, herbs, charms, weather signs that could border on the magical. You could be asked for advice on curing a cow's illness one day, and then eyed suspiciously the next if a storm ruined crops. A double-edged reputation, and historians still argue whether unmarried women like you enjoyed genuine autonomy, or whether they lived in constant precariousness, tolerated only because they were useful. Were they pioneers of independence, or tolerated oddities living at the community's edges? The ink in the rolls gives hints, but the lived truth is murkier. You, Cecilia, feel time's weight most when you see younger villagers growing into their roles. Girls who once tripped over their hems now spin wool with practiced fingers. Boys who once chased hoops now walk behind ploughs, sweating and swearing under their breath. You catch them glancing at you, perhaps wondering if your path is one they could ever choose or avoid. The stories of your life begin to circulate like gossip with a longer memory. People recall the disputes you fought in court, the strips you managed, the stubbornness that let you keep your independence. Around the hearths, your name slips into conversation, not always kindly, but always noticed. In a world where most peasants vanish into anonymity, you've carved a presence that lingers. Evenings grow quieter now. You sit by the hearth, turning a spindle between your fingers, watching sparks leap upward into the dark. Sometimes memories drift back: the smell of roasted pig on feast days, the sting of smoke in your eyes during Lent, the laughter of children chasing geese. You smile, though it's tinged with the ache of loss. Too many faces are gone: siblings, neighbours, friends taken by hunger, sickness, or war. You remain, weaving their stories into your own. And there's still humour, even in aging. You tease younger villagers that their ale tastes weaker than in your youth. You roll your eyes when someone repeats a sermon you've heard 100 times. You mutter that the reeve's belly grows fatter each year, while his patience shrinks. Sarcasm doesn't fade with age. If anything, it sharpens. But you also feel tenderness. Watching children run barefoot through the mud makes you ache with both nostalgia and relief. You know how hard their road will be, yet you're glad they don't see it clearly yet. For Cecilia, growing old means realizing that legacy isn't carved on monuments or sung by bards. It's in the quiet way younger villagers remember you, in the lines of ink that capture your name in manorial rolls, in the fact that centuries later, strangers will reconstruct your story. You don't know that, of course. You only know that life has been hard, ordinary, and yet extraordinary in its persistence. And as you pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, you hear the church bell toll, steady as always. The same bell you heard as a child, the same bell that marked feast and famine, quarrel and reconciliation. Its voice reminds you, time moves forward, but memory lingers in every toll. The years settle over you like layers of smoke and soil, Cecilia, until even the sharp edges of your independence soften into quiet. Brigstock continues to spin around you, children's laughter in the lanes, oxen pulling ploughs, church bells tolling the hours. But for you, each sound feels gentler, more distant. Life narrows to smaller circles. The hearth's glow, the rhythm of prayer, the occasional visit from neighbours who bring bread or gossip. You rise slower now, bones aching, joints stiff. The chores that once filled every waking moment are lighter, parcelled out to younger hands. You still spin wool, but less quickly. You still tend the hearth, but more often you sit and watch sparks leap instead of stirring the pot. The world doesn't stop needing you, but it forgives you for moving at half pace. Mainstream historical fact: medieval peasants who reached old age often relied on kin, neighbours, or charity for support. Without modern pensions, survival came from community networks and whatever property or savings you had managed to keep. For women like you, unmarried, that meant an unusual kind of freedom, control over property, but also vulnerability if illness struck. A quirky tidbit? Some villagers believed that older people, close to death, could sense omens more clearly, seeing signs in crows, storms, or dreams. An old woman muttering predictions by the fire was both feared and respected. Imagine the children sneaking glances at you, whispering, "She knows when the rain is coming." And historians still argue whether aging in a medieval village was dignified, with elders respected for wisdom, or precarious, with the old seen as burdens once they couldn't work. Likely, it was both, depending on whether you had land, reputation, or luck. You, Cecilia, sense your life turning quieter, but not smaller. Younger women sometimes ask your advice at the well. Children eye you with curiosity, half afraid, half in awe. Neighbours nod respectfully when you appear in court records, your name still carrying weight. You may not have married, but you've outlasted many who did. That in itself feels like a kind of victory. Evenings stretch long by the fire. You sip ale slowly, savouring the warmth, and let memories wash over you. The feast days with laughter spilling across the green. The hunger years, when bread crumbled thin and stomachs growled. The court sessions where you stood tall, your name inked for posterity. The endless mud, the endless smoke, the endless resilience. And when you walk past the churchyard, you feel no fear. The crooked crosses, the fresh-turned soil, the toll of the bell, it's all part of the rhythm you've lived inside since birth. Death doesn't arrive as an enemy, but as another neighbour you always knew was coming. One night, you settle into your straw bed, cloak wrapped tight, listening to the familiar hum of Brigstock dogs barking faintly, wind-rattling thatch, the low murmur of prayers through thin walls. You close your eyes, not with dread, but with a sense of completion. You've lived a life that may never reach royal chronicles, but it lingers in the ink of manorial rolls and the whispers of younger villagers. And centuries later, in this dim-lit bedtime story, your life drifts forward again, reminding us that resilience, ordinary as it seems, is extraordinary in its endurance. So now, listener, the long arc of Cecilia Pennefader's life drifts to its close, and with it, our journey through Brigstock softens into twilight. The fields lie quiet beneath a pale sky, the smoke from cottage chimneys curling upward in slow, unhurried wisps. The church bell, steady companion of her years, tolls faintly in the distance, fading into the hush of evening. Your own breathing slows as you imagine lying back on a straw mattress, the faint crackle of embers nearby, shadows swaying gently against wattle walls. Outside, the lane is hushed, mud cooling, animals bedding down for the night. All the noise of quarrels, festivals, duties, and gossip is muted now, as though the village itself exhales in rest. You let your body loosen, sinking deeper into stillness. Think of Cecilia's resilience, not loud or grand, but steady, a rhythm of bread, labour, laughter, and survival. Her world was smaller than ours, yet it held the same vastness of feeling, hunger and fullness, quarrel and forgiveness, loss and joy. And in her ordinary persistence, she carved a story that drifts all the way to you tonight. As the last embers fade in Brigstock's hearth, so too do the words soften, stretching into silence. Imagine a gentle hand smoothing down the rough edges of the day, folding each moment into rest. The fields will wait, the bells will toll again, and you can drift now, slowly, safely, into dreams. Sleep comes like the hush of a medieval lane after nightfall, steady, inevitable, kind. Breathe deep, let the weight ease from your shoulders, and rest in the quiet knowledge that you've walked through another life tonight, and tomorrow you'll wake lighter. End of script. Sweet dreams.